Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 70 of the Nurtured by Nature podcast. Today, I'm delighted to be joined in conversation by Denali, author of the recently published book, Holler, a graphic memoir of rural resistance. In this nuanced conversation, inspired by Denali's powerful book about the controversial Mountain Valley Pipeline in Appalachia, we discuss what activism really looks like, which is not the mainstream media's portrayal of protests by those on the fringes and out of touch with society. Denali's book utilises raw imagery stripped bare from complicated language that opens up this conversation at a heart level to everyone. An inclusivity that is rooted into everything we discuss and brings to the fore the passion and love that drives people to step forward to stand up for what they believe in. Denali encourages us to use our discernment to question the narratives we are consuming and to find the courage to advocate both for yourself and your community, and how this can take many forms, but importantly, simply allows you to embrace your existing skills and passions. Your voice and your actions are important. Alongside this call to action, we acknowledge the depths of resilience needed to hold the grief and overwhelm of hopelessness, whilst balancing a belief in a hopeful alternative vision for the future, and how community can be both our biggest driving force and our greatest asset as we embrace the stubbornness to take on what can on the surface seem insurmountable. Welcome, Denali, and thank you so much for joining us on this episode of the Nurtured by Nature podcast. I'm really looking forward to talking to you. I think you've got so much wisdom that you can share with us and our listeners, and we're going to talk about your lovely, I think it's just was released yesterday, so the start of May, your lovely graphic novel, Holler, which talks about the resistance to the Mountain Valley Pipeline in Virginia in America. But to get us started, I always just ask my guests to share a little bit of their nature story. So just really how nature has been a part of your life and inspired you, and just any fond memories you'd like to share to get us going would be lovely.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Fiona. I'm really excited to be here. I grew up in southern Maine in the United States, and my house was in the woods. So my earliest memories are plodding around in the woods, either with my sister or alone, and then emerging from the woods to my mom's big woodsy garden that she had in our yard growing up. We lived on a huge hill, and so the hillside in front of us was just full of daffodils, are the flower that I remember them being full of. And I know they were full of a lot of other flowers. I just, at that age, flower names weren't my top priority, but I remember really connecting to the worlds that I could create when I was outside and picking up acorns and scratching them on rocks to see what I could draw on bigger rocks, and collecting different shaped leaves and scootering on the pavement in the fall when the breeze is so cool in Maine. So I think my earliest nature memories are very connected to that woodsy part of Maine in the northeast of the US.
Oh, it just sounds lovely. I love trees. So it's a common theme in my podcast. Is my huge love of trees. So I love that change in the autumn as well, that transition, seeing all the amazing colours. It's just, you just can't help but be inspired by nature when you're in that sort of environment.
Totally. And now that I'm an adult, I garden. And so I know more about the plants and the trees.
Yeah.
But it is funny to think back on when I was a child and they didn't have names to me. They were just evergreen trees or deciduous trees
Yeah.
was the only distinction that I had. And then I knew daffodils, but beyond that, I don't know that I really knew many plant names or flower names.
Yeah, I think it's interesting, isn't it? Like we kind of in society get this like addiction to naming things, don't we? But like in childhood, we kind of just have this simple connection, and they just are. They are what they are. Well, you know, you didn't have to name them, but without you could still know them without naming them and have these beautiful relationships with them. And I think that's a real gift of nature, isn't it? It's just giving us this opportunity to experience a connection with everything in the world in a much more simple way than our society allows us in adulthood.
Yeah, I agree. I have a friend who I met in the Mountain Valley Pipeline fight who is many years older than me. She's well into her 70s. And she always jokes that she has this habit of asking people what the names of different plants and trees are, but she'll immediately forget them. So she doesn't even know why she asked in the first place. And I think that's like getting at something quite apt, which is that many of our brains can't handle the number of names that we've created for all of the different beautiful things in our world. But even just caring enough to ask and to listen to what someone else who's on a walk with you knows about the plants around you is so beautiful.
Yeah, I was listening to you saying that, and I was thinking it's almost about, it feels like it's about connection with the person that she's with. It's like having that shared experience that's how she sort of enters into it in the sort of acceptable societal manner. And but yeah, I mean, your book is fabulous. It's just this. It's called Holler, a graphic memoir of rural resistance, and it's just come out. And it's. I was saying to you just before we got started that I loved like the kind of raw simplicity of your beautiful imagery because it's the images that tell the story, and there's just when you strip away that language, there is just this, you know, you really connect with the story in just a really deep, sort of soulful way. I mean, was that your intention to sort of make it like more universal, I guess, in a way?
Yeah, that was exactly what I was thinking of when I started the project was that so many amazing sources of information about climate change are black and white, whether they're on the web or they're a book you get from the library or the bookstore. They tend to be 300 plus pages
Yeah.
of black and white text. And as a climate organizer for my whole career, I've read a lot of them and I've gotten good things from a lot of them, but I'm very aware that not everyone has a full-time job fighting climate change. And I don't think everyone needs to have a full-time job fighting climate change. So what I really wanted to do with this book was reach out to people who don't have the time or the capacity to read those dense sources on climate change, or maybe don't see themselves in those dense sources. Like I have a lot of kids in my life and I want kids to have more exciting books about climate change that include the environment, because there are so many beautiful books about nature, but climate changes specifically, books that I would have wanted to read. And then also, I live in a region of the US, in a region called Appalachia, which historically has been one of the poorest and most extracted from regions in the country. And there still are pockets of people here who aren't comfortable reading huge books or even the newspaper. And so I wanted them to be able to access, if they come upon the book, these stories as well and see themselves in them so that we're not excluding people just because our imaginations are constrained to what a book looks like, which is black and white, endless pages of text.
I love that, and like everything you do is about inclusivity, and I think that that's really important. And I actually had a lovely guest, I think just over a year ago, who was from Appalachia. She'd grown up there, and she actually has an ethical fashion brand. And we talked actually a lot about. She is very moved by like social justice, and she works supporting like local communities and giving back to like people in the prison population. And and also a lot of people who've been struggling with drugs, the prescription drugs that have caused numerous problems in marginalized societies. And it it has this, this sort of, I guess, to an outsider, like a bit of, people misjudge the community, I think, don't they? And actually, it has this huge depth of, I guess, community, actually, to reuse that word again, but like it's something that has almost been lost a lot from a lot of our more sort of um, progressive culture. It's so hard, isn't it? I mean, that's part of the beauty of your book is trying. You don't have to stumble over trying to find the words to kind of describe these things. And it I loved the book and the fact that you follow the story of such diverse people and how they are all united by their love of their land, and that's what brings them all together. And I think that's just such a powerful force, isn't it? Is, uniting with our love gives us the strength that we perhaps don't know we have.
Yeah, and I think being from India, I feel very connected to those narratives around, oh, that part of the world is just full of poor people who are backwards or uneducated. Or there are nicer ways of saying that, but I think oftentimes that's at the core of it. And often countries like India are talked about in that way, and regions like Appalachia are talked about in that way. But as you said, Fiona, there always is a much more nuanced story about the communities. And there's always a corporation, I think, at the center of why these communities are disadvantaged. And that's true in Appalachia, and it's true with colonization in India. But the patterns of mutual aid and community resistance, and the knowledge that no matter who's in the seats of power, your neighbor and your community are who you can really count on, is something that's really clear and known in Appalachia and in my home in India. Like the street my family lives on, everyone knows each other, even though it's gone from a town to a bustling city in southern India. My aunt and my family, they will be delivering sweets to neighbors, or neighbors will be giving sweets to them, or they'll be going to the child of the neighbor's wedding, or they know when someone passes away and how they passed away and were their children there. There are just all of these ways of depending on each other and knowing about each other that I think are really important, especially when we face an existential crisis like climate change. I mean, we know from climate change literature and from history that we will need each other. Like one of my favorite books is Parable of the Sower by Octavia Butler, and community is such a big part of the book, as is leadership and individuality and all of the complexities of being human, but community is really at the center of it.
Yeah, and I think it's a thread that often comes up in my conversations on the podcast, is just the importance of community. And I think it's reflected in our, how our society has evolved to separate us from the natural world, is also mirrored in the fact that we've been separated from each other as well. There's the hierarchies of, people above nature, and then also the hierarchies within our society, within the human context of how we are taught to relate to other people, is to keep us separated. And when we're separated, we are disempowered, basically. And actually, that's one of the beautiful things in your book, is that you talk about how it was the people coming together, and actually that was one of the greatest gifts for everyone, was actually the community that evolved during the resistance.
Yeah, and that's part of the title, the thinking behind the title of Holler. Some of your listeners might be familiar with the different definitions of the word holler, but in Appalachia, there are two prominent ones. One is a holler is a village tucked away or a little neighborhood tucked away in a mountainside. It tends to be like a handful of houses that are quite far from town and have to depend on each other, whether it's in times of serious flooding or just day-to-day needs, because in Appalachia there are a lot of elderly people who do need support. So holler is one name for the way people live tucked in the mountainside, which many of the people in the book do live in hollers. And then it's also a word for to yell or to call out. And when I was driving through the mountains, I was struck by how that's really what people were doing in the fight to stop the Mountain Valley Pipeline. They were hollering at each other from their hollers. And
Yeah.
yesterday, one of my friends in Southern West Virginia texted me a picture of the book in their holler. And I was struck by how in the background of the picture, is a dirt road. Like the hollers of Appalachia really are not what everyone in kind of like the urban elite thinks of as the life that we're reaching for. But for people in Appalachia, this is home and this is where many people feel connected to. And so, with that reality, I'm really interested in how they were able to, and we were able to holler at each other despite more distance than people in, say, New York City or London reach out to each other.
Yeah, I think I love that the kind of duality of that the name and just it's I think that's the thing is about like like to me hollering was like raising your voice and being heard and communication as well, the importance of communicating, which is again a very important part of the resistance was people using the individual skills, and that's what you did. You went and you spoke to six specific people who came forward, and you shared their stories of how they they didn't have to learn new skills. They used what they already knew, and that was their strength and what they could contribute to the community as a whole. And it's I think that's a really important message, isn't it, for people to take away from your book is you don't need to be someone else. You just need to be you and realize that you already have something important to contribute.
Yeah, I think particularly as an introvert, I often feel like, where is my place in the climate movement? Because many of the images of the climate movement, which are beautiful images, are on the streets of New York City or Berlin or Delhi, where it's big groups of people rising up. And I think that's beautiful and important. And also, protesting isn't going to save our planet on its own. And there are so many roles in the climate movement. I've spent my whole career working in communications, which is a very social way of working technically because you're reaching out to people, especially in digital organizing or connecting with journalists to tell them about what's happening in the movement. But it also can be quiet in a way that I like. Like I can spend a day with an op-ed that I'm writing that will then reach out to people in a different way than my very extroverted friends who spend their days on phone calls with partners. And I'm so glad that they're doing that. But also, I want us to talk more about the different ways we can be climate organizers or just the different ways we can protect our planet, because many people, both in places like India and in the US, and specifically in Appalachia, feel disconnected from these images of being activists or being climate activists specifically. But I don't think they need to feel disconnected. And that's what the six people in this book showed me, is that even, for example, if you're a single mother, which one of the people in the book, Crystal Mello, is, and you feel restrictions because your car can't drive a certain amount of mileage to the nearest capital city, or you are juggling childcare or gaps in childcare, there really still are ways that you can protect the environment you love. And I think it's important that we talk about that, because for many of us, we are yearning to feel connection with our environment. And if we don't talk about pathways that we can feel that connection together, then there is a sort of like harm being done to ourselves and our
Yeah.
community, and a loss that I think doesn't have to be there.
Yeah, I think that's the thing, isn't it? Is it's we get um so much kind of negative news, and for those of us that care, we find that just really massively overwhelming, and we also feel quite powerless to like actually make change. And then you do just find yourself sort of buried under the weight of this, huge desire to do something, but not having any idea what you can do. And even if you do something, is it going to make a difference? And I mean, I loved one of the stories of yours was about a photographer who walked the pipeline route and took pictures and actually um, raised awareness with like one of your national park services that didn't actually know like the route was going to impact them in the way that they did. And that's a very different image to the image that we're fed through mainstream media, which again is, it's intentional, isn't it? It's intentional to sort of alienate these people that are these activists, these courageous activists on the front line. And they're portrayed in a very specific way. I mean, I'm sure it's similar in the US as it is here. They're sort of the hippie dropouts and, smoking weed and, disconnected from society and everything like that. And it's, that's very deliberate. And I think that's something that we need to be very aware of as well, is like people are portrayed in a certain way for a reason, and it's a reason to keep them separated from society, sometimes even to propagate fear against them, that what are they going to do to you, and they just don't understand. And that's also very important, isn't it, is to realize, that these are just normal people, and actually what's uniting them is their love of the land. We have a phrase in this country, I don't know if you have it over there, which is called NIMBY, which is not in my backyard. And it's actually really, I was thinking about it, and I was thinking it's really used in such a negative way to just dismiss the opinions and thoughts and concerns really of the local people that are going to have been stewarding the land. They are the people that are familiar with the land. They'll often be the ones that are walking the land. They might not directly own it or manage it, physically, but they are familiar with it. They might know the sort of the way it floods when there's heavy rains, and where certain flowers and things that all the little things that you gain when you have a relationship with place over a longer time. And they're just so often dismissed with this term, and just sort of like they're just standing in the way of progress for the sake of it, and selfish, and actually it does them such a disservice.
Yeah, definitely. There was a recent huge news from the courts in the US in the northern part of the Midwest, where an international green group that I'm sure your listeners have heard of called Greenpeace lost a lawsuit against a massive fossil fuel corporation, Energy Transfer, because of Greenpeace's climate activism. And I think from that big a scale to the small scale of one's neighbor saying, "Oh, I hate those activists," something as simple as that, it's all part of a broader strategy that not only fossil fuel companies are actively using, but also just oppressors from now to our as far as we can remember collectively. It's just part of the toolkit. But I think getting to know the diversity of people who are connected to their environment and are taking climate change, the threat of climate change seriously, is so important. And it's important not only that people take the initiative to do that, but also that we offer people pathways to do that, because the pipeline movement here in Appalachia against the Mountain Valley Pipeline, it wasn't all the individuals weren't all in agreement. Some people were very focused on pipe safety, like for example, the chapter that you were referencing, Fiona, that tells the story of Paula Mann in West Virginia, who used her photography skills to document the pipeline route. Paula had the pipeline going through her land, and she was very concerned about this 42-inch diameter high pressure methane gas pipeline going through the steep slopes that she had spent her whole life on, and that 7 generations of her family had spent their whole lives on, and through massive boulders and through creeks that were precious to her. And then there are people like Michael James Storamo, who's in one of the final chapters, who was a student in Richmond, Virginia, who's from where the pipeline goes through in Blacksburg, Virginia, which is where Virginia Tech is. And Michael James Storamo really was activated by the injustice and the lack of community input and the lack of care for the environment, and ended up fighting the pipeline by being part of mutual aid and direct action movement. So I just think it's important that we're telling these stories of the different people who are fighting the pipeline, because I certainly don't feel the same as any other environmentalist, and probably any other environmentalist doesn't feel the same as me. But we do have a tendency to get grouped together. And I have had friends in the past say to me, "Oh, you're one of the tolerable environmentalists." But I'm not actually very tolerable. I just tend to tone it down with people who don't have the same knowledge that I do, so that they can feel more comfortable to have a conversation. So for some people, that means I'm more tolerable, but in other spaces where I'm more comfortable with the shared knowledge we have, I talk a different way. And yeah, I just think things would be better if people knew that any level of action that they're able to take in the moment is important and welcome in conversation with others, because there are definitely harmful modes of taking action.
Yeah, I think I mean I'm hoping that a lot of people are aware of the pipeline, but maybe I should just circle back, and because it's been a story that transcends a decade, hasn't it? It's it's actually it's impacted lives for a very long time. And so I don't do you want to just share a little bit about the pipeline, and how the whole movement came about and things?
There are children in the Mountain Valley Pipeline fight who have grown up in the pipeline fight, which is just illustrative of how long it's been. And there are people who have died from the stress of having the pipeline go through their land, who were elderly when it was proposed, and it impacted their mental and physical health so severely that they lost their lives to it. So it really, as you say, it has changed thousands of lives here in the US, and even around the world. There were definitely people who we were connected to in the fight. And the Mountain Valley Pipeline fight started when the pipeline was first proposed in 2014 during what was called in the US the Appalachian fracking boom, which many other countries have had other versions of the fracking boom, but it was sort of a upsurgence in fossil fuel companies constructing and proposing what the fossil fuel industry calls natural gas but is really more honestly referred to by scientists as fracked gas or methane gas because it does contribute to methane emissions, which contribute significantly to global greenhouse gases. So the pipeline was first proposed in 2014, and resistance started immediately when people started hearing about the pipeline, especially in this region, because Appalachia has been a huge center of extractive industry for the past century and more. And so the pipeline got proposed, and the path went all the way through West Virginia, which is the only state in the US that's fully in the region that's called Appalachia. Every corner of West Virginia is in Appalachia. And in my opinion, West Virginia is the most beautiful state in the US. But it is also quite marginalized and misunderstood. And then it went through where I live now, which is Southwest Virginia, which sounds a little confusing to people who even live in Richmond, Virginia, but I'm sure even more confusing to people farther away. But it's in the southwestern part of the state of Virginia. And then it goes into Southern Virginia, where for now the pipeline has ended and hopefully forever, but they are proposing an extension to the pipeline called the Southgate Mountain Valley Pipeline Extension. And there are dozens of new fracked gas projects that are being proposed in Virginia and North Carolina. And this pipeline specifically is one of the biggest pipelines that the industry builds. There are a lot of gas pipelines that are tiny. I mean, many parts of the world have gas pipelines going through our communities that we know of. They could be as tiny as like a few inches in diameter. This pipeline is, if people know about hula hoops, or maybe even if they raise their arms and put their arms in a circle, it's 42 inches in diameter. So it's huge, and it's a high pressure pipeline. And the gas is coming from the fracking fields of West Virginia during a time where scientists across the board have said that we need to stop building fossil fuel pipelines. But because of the political support and greed of these companies, they've continued to propose and complete these projects.
Yeah, in the face of massive resistance, sadly, it's. I mean, that one of your was several of the people that you mentioned, they actually live on properties that the pipeline has directly gone through, haven't they? And I know one of the things that you mentioned is actually that you mentioned earlier in our conversation, the safety and the fact that basically, like, if you're close, and I don't mean like on top of it, I just mean, in proximity of this pipeline, and there is a leak, like, and a blast, then everything is gone. Like, there's nothing left, and even up to miles away, serious burns and damage is done. And yeah, it's quite, I think it's quite shocking, isn't it, that that sadly it did happen. I think, that we have to cover that part of the story as well, isn't it? That despite like all this amazing work, like, it did happen, and that had quite a toll on in even yourself, didn't it? I mean, that's touched on this in the story as well, of like, you came to this part of just being kind of like, these people have fought this for like 10 years, and then it's happened, and you're like torn apart by it. And how, I mean, are you able to share like a little bit of like how you refound your hope and strength again? Because I think it's a really, that's, sometimes we aren't successful, are we? And it is like, how do we not give up in those moments?
I think we're often talking today about how hopeless we feel, and it's very real to feel hopeless. And you were talking earlier, Fiona, about how we can get caught in the media spiral of despondency and not know what to do. And it's interesting, as someone that has worked in climate change organizing for the better part of a decade, I don't think that ever goes away, unfortunately. I just think for me personally, because I feel so rooted and grounded in the living world around me, whether that's in my community or the environment. It's not a choice for me. So I go through bouts of depression or hopelessness or both. And I definitely feel those feelings very intensely, but I don't experience a question of, is this what I want to do with my life? Because it doesn't feel like a choice. And I don't think that that's true for everyone. And I don't think that's to be true for everyone. But as useful as it may be for a few people, that I don't think you have to get over hopelessness to be a climate activist. To me, what's important is that I see a possibility of something different. And I see the impact of people who invest in that possibility together. I think as a child, I was very connected early on to the anger I felt at learning about injustice.
Yeah.
In the US, we learn about the civil rights movement and the genocide of indigenous people who stewarded this land for much longer than my family has been here since immigrating for the US and many people around me. Of course, we learn about it. We don't learn about it perfectly, and I've had to do a lot of unlearning and relearning. But I remember as a child feeling a very deep sense of rage and a need for people to know what was going on and to hold the nuances of going to the grocery store while our country is funding genocide. To be able to hold that nuance is important to me. And so I think that has been a big part of why I feel resilience in my climate organizing, because I feel very practiced in holding both doom and possibility. And that's my way. I think some people maybe are more drawn to connecting to hope itself. And I think that's part of my way sometimes, but I don't always feel hope. I mean, in the US right now, we've gone through a huge administration change so that everyone in the world knows about our business. And part of the grief of that is that the last administration did peddle some historic climate legislation that really impacts our local communities.
Yeah.
And now it's being attacked by this current administration. And so some of that hopelessness that I feel is like, we never know what these leaders are up to and we can never count on them. But I do feel grounded in I can do something every day that helps me stay alive and helps my community feel connected to what we know about our connection and belonging in
Yeah.
the natural world.
Yeah, I can empathize with you there because we're also having our own, challenges in the UK with our own government. Perhaps not so well documented around the world as your current challenges, but our own government is, literally sort of on the verge of trying to, change the laws that gave a lot of protection to the natural world, particularly in the face of development and planning, and just basically kind of tearing up the rule book and being like, we don't want to protect the natural world. Progress is more important, and progress at all costs. And so it is, I think, something that we're all facing, and we all have to find our way of dealing with it. I mean, you mentioned the word grief, and I think that is really key, isn't it? Is it's like, when you do suffer, you lose someone you love and you have grief for that loss, like it never goes away. It doesn't leave you. It's something that you'll always carry. And it's, you know, I mean, I saw a lovely illustration once that said like your world just expands around it. So the grief becomes a smaller part of your existence, but your grief doesn't shrink, but your kind of life grows. So it feels less in that way rather than it actually becoming less. And I think that's the thing is it. I've spoken to a lovely guest who had an amazing book, and that book was about like how do we hold, this grief, but at the same time hold this vision for a future, and that's where it is, and it's not in balance. Really, it's not going to be perfect. There's going to be times when the grief weighs heavier on you than your ability to hold the vision for the future, and then there'll be other times when the grief is lessened and your vision for the future is the stronger kind of driving force at that time. And I think it's just learning to be gentle with ourselves, isn't it? And realize that it is a balance, and it is, there are going to be moments when we feel really low, and then there are going to be moments when we feel like incredibly like hopeful and motivated, and then there's external forces that that come in and will change that narrative as well from even within us. And it's just, I mean, I love it's been I love speaking to you and hearing how you've experienced life and how you've managed that. And I think for a lot of people, you do start with that rage, don't you? And anger and frustration, and how you've sort of managed to transmute that. And I think a lot of what comes across in your book is about love for your land. And I feel like that's at the center of you now more than your rage.
That makes sense. I think that it's something that grounds me. I also find it important to have people in my life who are at the center of my life that feel both the rage and the connection deeply. I think that one thing that can make activism and climate activism difficult is battling the people you love most for legitimacy of your feelings.
Yeah.
And I hope that people are able to find more community in what we know about what's happening to our planet. Because I definitely have had times in my life, like in college, maybe one of my friends was interested in the environment, but the bulk of my friends were people who came from working class, immigrant, and communities of color, and felt like they were at college to get a degree to make money. And I respect that on some level, that we've created a world in which many people feel like they can't hold both their humanity and the yearnings of capitalism
Yeah.
for them to be something that we're not naturally. But also, I felt very isolated to be I didn't want to be the exception to all environmentalists. I feel pretty connected to how annoying we are. Like, I don't want to be not annoying to people, because the annoying element of a lot of environmentalists is they make people think about things that they don't want to think about. Like, so many people in the suburbs do not want to think about their lawn. They just don't. So then they call it annoying. But I think it's important that we don't always feel annoying, or we don't always feel like the exception to a rule, but we're also surrounding ourselves with friends and loved ones who want to grow with us. Maybe they're not in the perfect place, but they share our values. I mean, I've never considered myself to be complete or have perfect opinions, so it's not something I expect from my loved ones. But in my loneliest or most hopeless moments, I think two big things have saved me. One is my love of hiking and living. I live very close to the Appalachian Trail, which has some recognition across the
Yeah.
world, certainly in the US. And there are so many trails near me. So one thing that saves me is hiking, which isn't the same for everyone, but most people have some love of spending time outside. Sometimes I just like to sit on my hammock, but generally hiking is impactful. And then the other thing that has saved me is being able to call a friend or talk to my family or my partner and them understand that these feelings of despair are real. They're not, I often hear people get called, or the movement get called Chicken Little, running around like the world's
Okay.
ending.
Yeah.
And I don't really get that, because it's not a bad thing to be
It's
running around.
invalidating you, isn't it?
Right,
Yeah.
right. And it's also wrong. Like, a lot of parts of the world that we know could end. So it's not a reasonable criticism to say that people are being too doomerist. I find it very important in this current world that's very digitized, and we often talk about loneliness, that probably all of your listeners feel a pull towards protecting the living world. And I think it's important that we don't feel alone in that pull.
Yeah, I think that's really important, and I think that comes back to this idea of community, doesn't it? And just and that's something that we can learn from nature as well. Nothing in nature exists in isolation. Everything, across species is working together, and it needs each other, and that's something that we need to kind of refine and relearn, isn't it? Is actually, there's this, beautiful need for celebration of diversity of humanity, and amazing kind of wealth that is there when we embrace the diversity of people, and what they can bring, and the perspectives that they have, and the unique wisdom that we all hold, and how it is important to bring that to the table and shape the future. But it is important, I think. I mean, one of the words I've always liked is active hope, which is, it's not passive. It's not just sitting there, something's going to get better and I don't have to do anything about it. Just have to think about rainbows and butterflies and unicorns, and we're going to solve the crisis. But it's actually, you do need to do something, and that's really, like, what I love about your book is it's saying, like, it doesn't matter who you are, what your background is. You've got a teacher, you've got a single mother, you've got a nurse, the student who organizes things, a photographer, a seed keeper with an indigenous background. It's like they all have different skills, and it's like, if you're sitting here listening to this and you're thinking, what can I bring? And it's like, everyone can bring something. And even yourself, I mean, your beautiful book and your amazing drawings are, they're this beautiful offering to the world, to like make this accessible to people. Like you said right at the beginning, it's like bringing this into a simpler conversation that is more accessible to even more people, so that we can have this conversation with more people, and they can like start to think about how we can shape a future that's better for nature and better for people. Because even if you're not driven by the climate crisis, you've got to be driven by what's happening to our communities and what's happening to our people in social justice. And and once if you've listened to a few of my episodes, and I'm sure the two are hand in hand, they're inextricably linked. You can't separate one from the other, and it's just important, and to make it as accessible, and to make sure we're having these conversations, and try and do it, I suppose, from a place of love, and looking for an ability to collaborate with people, I think, is important.
Yeah, I agree with that. There's this line that Michael James Storamo said in our interview that's in the book. I think it's at the end of their chapter, which is chapter 5 of the book. And they say, what if we just looked at these seemingly insurmountable forces, like the fossil fuel industry, and just said, no, we're not going to just accept what you're saying. And that's part of it too for me. I think I was raised by a mother who was always questioning the world and questioning what people told her were true. And part
Yeah.
of that is that she is a woman who grew up in India, and in India, women are told a lot of things are true that are not true, like that you're the lesser gender. That's just not true. And also, she's an immigrant. And so she came to a country with one understanding of the way community can work, and came to a country that tends to be more individualist. And so she has a capacity to question those things. And it is important to me that people question things, because I think that in this digital world where we're not taught media literacy, it can be easy to just accept what dominant sources are telling us. Like, for example, one of the biggest outlets in the US, the New York Times. It can be really easy to be a liberal in this country and just accept anything the New York Times
Yeah.
says. But I think it's quite important, even with a huge old media source like the New York Times, to think about diversity in who we're talking to and what sources we're learning from. We can read big media sources. It's also great to listen to sources like Democracy Now! That are independent nonprofits who have a track record of actually showing the face of activists and showing their humanity and covering genocide in an honest way. So I feel like definitely community and hope matter. And also something that the people in this pipeline fight showed me matters, and my mom showed me matters, is that we are not afraid to question and resist forces that tell us that we're too stupid or too irrelevant to know what truth is.
Yeah. Yeah, I love that. I think that's really important, and sometimes, and I think, I talk quite often about like our intuition as well. And, like when we have a feeling, whether you want to call it intuition or, that gut feeling of like, actually, sometimes you can't even explain it, but you're like, your sort of spidey senses go off and you go, hang on, no, this doesn't feel right. Something feels off about this. And it's like, just encouraging people to like follow that and question, and not just dismiss themselves as well. That's the other thing, be an advocate for yourself, be an advocate for your community, whatever you're passionate about. If you're driven, probably listening to this, you're more driven by the environment, but if you're driven by, your social injustice as well, like, step up and find out more, educate yourself, read extensively, and just, I think discernment is a big thing as well, isn't it? It's just, like, just look at everything with your eyes wide open, think about who's writing it, why they might be writing it, and try and balance it with lots of different sources. Um,
Totally.
yeah.
Yeah, and I think for me, it's been important to read primary sources from marginalized communities, to not just rely on secondary sources of people reporting on community voices, but to, for me, the civil rights movement in the US and the Black liberation movement are big sources of learning and inspiration. For other people, other movements will be big sources. But I think it's really important to read the words of Assata Shakur, not to just read people who have talked about her work, but to read her work specifically, or Malcolm X or Ella Baker. These are all leaders that had their own voices. They don't need people, especially people not from marginalized backgrounds, to say what they think they were saying, but to go directly to the source. And for me, as a American-based climate activist, to make sure that I'm listening to and in communication and community with global climate activists, because I do happen to live in this country that is the biggest fossil fuel villain, in my opinion, in the world. And so I focus my organizing here. And this book is about people who live here. But uh, this isn't all there is to the climate movement, certainly. There's a whole globe around us. So to make sure that we're learning from each other and questioning what traditional sources are saying to all of us feels important.
Yeah, definitely. I know one of the things that you wrote in your book, which is something that has always been close to my heart, is that people protect what they love. And my background was as a wildlife photographer. I've spent many years in Africa, and yeah, I always saw my photography as a way to inspire people to love the natural world. And I think that's important as well, that we need to, like, when we're perhaps dealing with people who aren't as on board with this, is like, we do need to inspire as well. We need to, like, remind people, like, why the natural world is incredible, and have nice conversations about it as well, rather than just, being like, oh my god, we've got to do this because we're all going to implode otherwise. It's like, there's so, like, you use the lovely word nuance, and I think that's the thing, isn't it, is remembering that these conversations can be deep, they can be nuanced, and to have both sides of it represented as well, to remind people why we love nature. And for me, when you were talking about, like, how you get through, like, those sort of darker days, like, for me it is my love of nature that gets me through. It's, that's the reason that I'm like, like you, it's not, there isn't a choice to give up. It's like, this is, in my soul, to, like, be a voice for nature and for the people that care for nature, and to provide this space where, it's community in its own way as well. This podcast is bringing this space where I can share this beautiful diversity of voices and opinions from around the world, and give people the opportunity to learn and to question as well. Yeah, it has been absolutely amazing speaking to you. And I just wonder if there's anything you would like to leave people with. Obviously, I'm gonna have links to your website and your social media in the podcast show notes, and hopefully people are gonna go out and grab your book as well. It's a lovely, just, I just think it's a beautiful gift to the world to remember, like, so many, that, there's so many central threads in it, but it's also just at its center, just to simplify that it's people uniting around things that they love actually can have a huge impact, and that's a really important message to hold. But is there anything you would love to share with people and leave them with, as a last message to them?
The most important thing to me through writing this book and putting it out in the world is something we've talked about in this episode, and maybe can bear some repeating, is that you don't have to be someone else to protect what you love and to protect the environment. You can be exactly who you are, and use the skills that you already have to connect with and protect the environment, hopefully in community, with some connection to possibility for what things could look like, and some discernment for what people are telling you. And also, I think one big lesson that I learned writing this book is, both in the writing process and from the people that I interviewed, is stubbornness really does. It's one of our winning traits, I think, as a people, that we have rootedness, and we can connect to those roots and to our community, and be stubborn in the face of billionaire politicians and corporations that would love to run away to space and leave us all behind on a burning planet.
Yeah, I love the idea of being stubborn. I definitely I have a little Dachshund dog, and one of the traits of Dachshunds is that they're stubborn, and very politely we call her willful, but it's definitely it's a trait that we definitely all need to embrace. I think in the years that we have ahead of us as we undertake these movements and hold this vision for the future that we know is possible. I think that's the other thing is just we know it's possible. There are going to be challenges. It's not going to be easy, but it is possible. And there are amazing people like yourself, Denali, out in the world, and people can connect with you. And just we just need to build our communities and draw strength from each other, and that's how we're going to move through this and learn and hold that vision for a future that's brighter for all of us. But it's been an absolute pleasure speaking to you. I have a feeling that this is probably not going to be your only book. It's going to be the first of, I hope, many that will come, because I think you have a beautiful gift and a way of sharing what is quite a heavy and difficult subject in a way that's very digestible and easy and approachable. And I think that's a really important gift. So I hope that it's going to be the first of many, because I'd like to see more of your amazing illustrations and your beautiful way of just speaking to people's hearts in a way that's inclusive, because I think that inclusivity is really an important message at this time as well. But it's been my pleasure to host you today, and I hope we'll see more from you in the future, and I'd love to have you back in the future to talk more.
Thank you so much for having me, Fiona.
Thank you so much for listening to the Nurtured by Nature podcast. I truly hope this conversation has brought some hope and inspiration into your life. I would love to have these messages ripple out across the world. So if you can, please share this episode with your friends, leave a review on your favourite podcast player, and make sure you subscribe so you don't miss the next episode. I would love to hear from you, so please feel free to connect with me on the links provided in the podcast description. But most importantly, thank you so much for being a part of this journey with me. But don't forget to simply get out there and enjoy the natural world.